The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, my question's to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement that by early 2010 New Zealand will be coming out of recession reasonably aggressively?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I stand by the full quote from March 2009, which is, for the benefit of the member, I think that by the end of 2009, early 2010, this time next year, we'll actually be starting to come out of that, and I think actually starting to come out of it reasonably aggressively. I'm more optimistic about 2011 than 2010, but nevertheless, I think 2010 will be positive. Mr Speaker, those statements have proved to be entirely correct. We are starting to come out of the recession by the end of 2009. 2010 will be positive. 2011 will see considerable improvement. And in terms of aggressive growth, the House should note that the New Zealand economy has actually grown more in the last 9 months than it did in the full 4 years period prior to that, from September 2005 to September 2009.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. If the Prime Minister's prediction and statement was, as he said, entirely correct, how does he explain Treasury's comments last week that the recovery wasn't going according to plan, that there's been a slowdown in the economy, and in fact that economic growth is failing to keep up with population growth?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, notwithstanding the quote was actually made 18 months ago, and in the world economy things move around by the week, let alone 18 months, why don't we quote from Alan Bollard, who just today said the economic recovery is proving brittle, uncertain and full of surprises, but he says we have now emerged from a long recession and have experienced some quarters of, quote, significant growth.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
If the Prime Minister claims that his statement was entirely correct, how does he explain the quarterly survey of business opinion that came out in September for the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research that showed that business confidence fell from positive 26 to negative 9?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, again, there's quite a lot of volatility in the QSBO, and that's for a variety of reasons. Not the least of them one has to accept because globally, actually, in May, August and June, we saw a number of different things occurring internationally. But I would say on the QSBO, BNZ's commentary said it's disappointing but not deathly, and they are picking 0.6 and 0.5 for the Q3 and Q4 respectively.
Chris Tremain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, in what condition was the economy his government inherited in late 2008?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I could sum that up in one word, but I'll choose not to do that. But let's just cast our mind back to the economic conditions of the September quarter of 2008, just before the election. The economy was in its third consecutive quarter of recession, having shrunk 1.5% in the 9 months. Inflation, well, that was running at 5.1%. Real after-tax wages, that's right, they dropped by 0.8% over the preceding year. Real exports had declined 2% over the preceding year. The tradables part of the economy, well, that had been in a recession for 4 years. The current account deficit had blown out to 8.6%. Mr Speaker, Labor's farewell gift to the nation was an economy in a disastrous state.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, what does the Prime Minister pretend that things are getting better for the average New Zealand household when his own Statistics New Zealand department last week pointed out that in fact the median wage for New Zealanders in the first time in its record-taking had actually fallen by $9 a week?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, again, if one wants to quote all the things that Stats New Zealand have said, they said this is not statistically significant. I would also say that the New Zealand Income Survey is a compositional number that actually includes all income for people aged 15 and above, which includes investments. So for a start off, if interest rates are lower, income is less. But, Mr Speaker, the best measure of changes in earnings from year to year comes from the QES. That is the same rate used to calculate the floor on New Zealand super, and that shows that real after-tax earnings have been growing under National after 5 years of no growth under the other lot who were hopeless.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Easy question, Mr Speaker. How does the growing number of unemployed people, up from 6.1 to 6.8%, respond to his comment last week that, quote, "My sense is they'll be feeling a bit better now that summer has come"?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, they'll all be feeling better because one always feels better when the weather's a bit better, but also, Mr Speaker, they'll be feeling a lot better because the tax cuts are in their pocket. And to quote Chris Carter, I remember him saying he campaigned on getting rid of the GST up to 15%, and in the end he did nothing. And that's why Chris Carter actually speaks for the Labour Party caucus.
Chris Tremain. Order. I've called Chris Tremain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Order.
To the Prime Minister, how does inflation now compare with the inflation his government inherited in late 2008?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, it's a lot lower, but Mr Speaker, why don't we just choose one area to give a sense of what's been happening with price increases? Let's go back to September 2008, and I don't know, let's pick fresh fruit and vegetables. Up 14% under Labor in a year. Bread, okay, that was up 18% under Labor in a year. Milk, up 12%. Cheese, that was up a whopping 42%. Eggs, up 13%. Petrol, up 29%. Electricity, up 7%. Gas, up 14%. No wonder they were booted out.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order.
Speaker, how many additional jobs has the Prime Minister's job initiatives, like the Job Summit, the cycleways, how many additional jobs?
Order. I apologise, Honourable Member. With that level of interjection, I'm struggling to hear the question. I'm sure the Prime Minister would want to hear it. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He might not, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, let me repeat the question. How many additional jobs has the Prime Minister's job initiatives created in New Zealand over the last year? And how does this compare with the 250,000 additional jobs created by Australia this year? And has he narrowed the gap?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I don't have to hand how many jobs have been created, but Mr Speaker, what I can say is, in my view, the Job Summit did a good thing of getting employers, of getting employees, and ultimately getting government and unions all on one page to deal with the worst financial crisis, Mr Speaker. But, Mr Speaker, I can say this. There are 17 people who've got a new job. That's right, they're on Chris Carter's list to get rid of Phil Goff.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, point of order.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Order. Point of order has been called.
Just,
the Honourable Leader of the
Speaker,
Opposition.
a very specific question that was asked, how many additional jobs were created compared to the 250,000 extra jobs in Australia, and has that narrowed the gap? There wasn't an effort made to answer that.
Order. I think if I heard correctly, and I've stressed the level of noise in the House, I may not have heard correctly, but I believe the Prime Minister said he didn't have that exact figure. And of course, where a primary question is quite as vague as does a minister stand, well, the Prime Minister on this occasion stand by a statement made quite some time ago, it's hard to expect him to have that detail of information. I think that would be a bit unreasonable for me to expect that. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, supplementary question.
Mr Speaker. Has the wage gap with Australia widened or narrowed this year, and if so, by how much?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, narrowed on the data series that we've always used to measure it.
Question number 3, Alan Peachy.
Mr Speaker.
Order. I've called Alan Peachy.
Mr Speaker, my question to the Minister for Tertiary Education. What actions has the government taken to increase student places at universities?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to report to the House the government will invest a further $55 million to fund almost 3,000 more university undergraduate